It was the first day of NFL training camp, 1961. 38 members of the Green Bay Packers arrived to start a brand new season. The previous season had ended with a horrible loss in the NFL championship game to the Philadelphia Eagles. But this was a new season. And many of the same players from last year's team arrived with great expectations for picking up right where they left off. Legendary coach Vince Lombardi had a different idea. His biographer said it this way. It said, Coach Lombardi started each season from scratch, assuming that the players were blank slates who carried over no knowledge from the year before. And so he began with the most elemental statement of all. He said, gentlemen, holding the pigskin in his right hand, this is a football. And from there, he would walk these trained professional players through the most basic elements of the game that they had first learned way back when they were in little gritters. Gentlemen, this is a football. You know, we've been through quite a stretch as a church over the past 15 months. We walked through one of the greatest times of social upheaval in our lifetime. We saw the collision of a bunch of controversial and deeply divisive issues all at once. We had a public health crisis in COVID that came with many tricky decisions. Should the church meet in person or remotely? Should we wear masks or no masks? Should we encourage vaccines or no vaccines? Should kids be in school or at home? Then we had on top of that a political crisis, one of the most divisive elections in recent memory, and then a financial crisis. And so many people were out of work and companies shutting down and the government supplementing people's incomes, inflation on the rise. Then a racial crisis, the death of George Floyd and the cries for racial justice all over our country, complete with violence by some and denial by others. If you were to take any one of those crises and walk through it, it would be an enormous challenge. Put them all together, and you have a history-altering disruption of our entire society. And it's also caused churches, including ours here at Grace, to make thousands of little decisions to both ensure that Jesus' mission goes forward and the gospel remains preeminent and our community is served well, while at the same time protecting the most vulnerable and loving our neighbors well. And so we initially closed to in-person gatherings, then we reopened last summer, then we closed again in the fall as cases began to soar in our local area, then we reopened in person in early 2021, and we've been through a lot of change. Almost a year ago, I preached a series of sermons about the value of the church scattered. It was called The Church Has Left the Building, where we affirmed that the church has never been about bricks and mortar or an institution. It's about people and the unstoppable missional movement of Jesus in the world. And during these past 15 months, our church has learned what it means to love our neighbors better, to serve the common good, to turn living rooms into sanctuaries and devices at the kitchen table into portals for spiritual and relational connection. We responded to COVID with increased online options and TV options, and we will continue to explore how those platforms can serve Christ well. We've endured a season of scattering. But at its core, the church is a gathered movement, an embodied movement, an incarnational expression, which just means in the flesh. And as the world begins to open its doors again, we must reconsider the power of the church gathered. Now, for those of you who are watching online from all over the place, I don't want you to misunderstand me. And I have a very specific call and challenge for you at the end of my message today. And so please hang with me. But I'm asking you to allow me to make my case first, because I think we need to have a Vince Lombardi moment. Like, gentlemen, this is a football. I can say this. Grace, this is a church. This is corporate worship, and this is why it's good. This is a conversation in the parking lot with a stranger, and this is why it's good. This is a family habit of getting the kids out the door on Sunday, and this is why that's good. And so we're calling this series Better Together. Let's think about that better part just for a moment. How many of you know that things can be better? Like, for some of you, life has been tough, family life and work life and personal life and spiritual life, but it can get better. So don't give up. Don't accept the status quo. Don't just assume that this is a new reality. Things can get better. And I would ask you to ask yourself, what's my first step toward better? What will lead you toward better? Ultimately, the answer is a connection with God and with others, because do you know that the people who are doing better right now, regardless of what's happening around them, it's the people with deep and rich and lasting friends and a deep and rich and lasting faith. which brings us to the together part. There is something built deep inside us that not only longs for togetherness, but requires it. God has designed us to dwell richly together. There was an epidemic even before the pandemic that only has gotten worse in the last 15 months, and that epidemic is loneliness. The first mention of loneliness in the Bible is God's rebuke. It is not good for man to be alone. Loneliness is not good. God rebuked it. We were made for togetherness. Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone, and he was drawing from this huge amount of data. And he shows that we've become increasingly isolated as a people, isolated from family and friends and neighbors and really all social groups. We belong to fewer organizations. We know our neighbors less. We socialize with our families less. We meet with friends less frequently. And the title of his book comes from a weird finding that more Americans are bowling than ever before, but they're not bowling in leagues anymore. They're bowling alone. And on top of that, we're as digitally connected as we've ever been, and at the same time lonelier. Again, this is all before COVID and lockdowns and no school and working from home. And so Putnam points out that isolation has ramifications emotionally. People who are isolated are 10 times more likely to be depressed and have anxiety and loneliness and a low self-esteem and substance abuse problems. They have difficulties eating and sleeping. But it also has physical effects. One study injected 270 people with the common cold virus. Those with strong social connections did not get as sick and did not stay sick as long. People who had strong relationships but poor health habits like eating and exercise are just as healthy as those with weak relationships and really good health habits, which means, as the saying goes, better to eat Doritos with friends than asparagus alone. No, that's not a saying. I made that up. But anyway, strong social connections have a massive positive impact on your quality of life, emotionally and physically. But what Putnam didn't address, but it's equally as true, is that isolation affects us spiritually as well. When you live in spiritual isolation, you are far more likely to give into temptation. You will fall more easily into discouragement. You're more likely to be self-absorbed, more likely to spend money and time in selfish ways. You're more likely to live in self-deception, to not know the truth about who you are. You won't have insight into these things because nobody is close enough to know you and to actually talk to you about them. And as a result, you won't live the life you were created to live because you're rejecting God's design for how your life was created to work best, together, connected, in gospel-centered, life-giving community with other people. And you cannot flourish without this kind of togetherness. I don't care how well other areas of your life are going. I don't care if you're successful in your job or financially wealthy or brilliant intellectually. You won't truly sense that your life is flourishing without relational togetherness with other believers. God created us for it. And so today I want us to explore 4 benefits of the church's togetherness. And to do that, I want to look at a passage of scripture that is one of the only detailed descriptions of the ancient church. It's a pristine look at the church before it was corrupted over time. It's a chance for the Spirit of God to take us back to the basics. Grace, this is a church. And the passage is in Acts chapter 2, and I'm just going to read the tail end of this description in verses 46 and 47. It says this: "And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." Now, I want to talk about 4 benefits today of our gathering, but these aren't the only 4. And I'm going to come back to the same theme all month and look at different reasons for our gathering. But here's the first for today. Togetherness establishes a predictable habit of spiritual priority. Look there in verse 46. It says, day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes. Their spiritual life was a priority in their schedule. You know, when something is important, we put it on the schedule. Regular visits to the dentist, kids' sports practices, date night with your spouse. If it's important, it goes on the schedule. It becomes part of the routine, and eventually it becomes a habit. And in the end, your life is the outcome of your daily and weekly habits. And so where does faith fall onto that priority list? Is it one of your daily and weekly rhythms? Is it non-negotiable? The only way something can be a priority in your life is if it's a priority in your schedule. And this passage says that members of that early church had a regular, predictable habit of gathering with other believers, both in big groups, in the temple courts, and in small groups, house to house, for meals and community. That's why we believe it's so important for each person to gather with the large church in corporate worship and to gather in homes around your area in a life group, temple courts, and house to house. It's a habit of gathering. Luke 4:16 says this about Jesus, that on the Sabbath day, it says Jesus went to synagogue as was his custom. What does that mean? It means every week, every Sabbath day, it was on his calendar. Every week he gathered with other believers for worship. It was his custom. It was his habit because he knew what a priority it was. So what does it mean to prioritize God in your life? It means he's on your schedule. Like you can't say God is my priority and then never have time for him. That's craziness. And so a weekly gathering with the church is a way to establish that predictable habit of prioritizing God in your life. If you have even the vaguest interest in becoming a more spirit pumped up follower of Jesus, or someone who knows a little bit more, feels their faith a little bit more deeply, has a little bit more clarity on God's direction in their life, then gathering with the church is a no-brainer. It's a thing that you should have on your calendar every week. I'm truly amazed by the number of people who are flipping coins every Sunday morning. Should we go to church or shouldn't we go? Do we have more important things to do this week? Should we go on the boat instead? Should we go to the kids' soccer game instead? Whatever. Guys, the time for flipping coins on Sunday mornings needs to be over. Establish the predictable habit of prioritizing church. And listen, I understand that during COVID, some of you got out of the habit of church every week. And there have been legitimate safety concerns, and some of you are in a vulnerable health situation or live with someone who is. But there are others, and I know because I've talked to you, who have just fallen into the rut of hanging out at home for church. It's easier. Like you can eat pancakes and watch church. You can stay in your PJs and watch church. You can answer emails and kind of watch church. It's great. You don't have to get your kids ready. You don't have to, you can have church playing in the background as your kids are tearing the house apart in the foreground. But you're basically not coming because it's just easier not to. Let me just say to you right now, post-COVID, you have a very unique opportunity to choose your habits wisely and strategically. Like you almost get to rebuild your life from scratch. So don't just continue the bad habits that you've established. And I'm telling you, one of the things that will help you to prioritize your faith is putting the effort to gather with the church. Get out of neutral, get back into drive, get up, get the kids ready, put some clothes on yourself, gulp down some coffee and make it a priority. Establish a habit of prioritizing your faith. But here's the second benefit of togetherness. Togetherness brings the joy of shared experience. Look back at our text description of what it says about the church gathered. They received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. Now, I bolded the descriptive words there, glad, generous, praising, favor. Like their togetherness produced joy. That's the summary. Like just the joy of a shared experience together in the fellowship of Christ. Jesus said in Matthew 18 that when 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. So when we're gathered in Jesus' name, there is a joy and a power that comes because of his presence. It's actually with us. So 2 weeks ago when we talked about praying for people, and then we got to witness the answered prayer of Emma Brickell's story of healing and the power of prayer in the lives of Jess and Neil. Some of our leaders came up to the front of the room and they said, anyone who needs prayer can come forward. And there was love and hope and joy and praise that filled the room because the presence of the Lord was there in our shared experience. This past Wednesday, when our youth gathered, the same thing happened. People came to be prayed for, and the presence of God was here. I've had multiple people tell me that when they walked into church for the first time after COVID and looked around the room, the instant the first note was played of the first song and they heard the church singing together, they just couldn't control the tears. Why? Because there's a joy that permeates our shared experience in the presence of Christ. There's a difference between watching something from a distance versus actually being there and experiencing it in person. I have a pastor friend who's a little older than me, and when he was a little boy, his dad had season tickets to the Steelers games. It was 1972, the Steelers were playing the Oakland Raiders, and his dad had a habit of leaving the game early when the outcome was sealed to beat the traffic out of the parking lot. So the Steelers were sure to lose this one. They were down deep in their own territory in the fourth quarter, and it happened to be 4th and 10 on the with 22 seconds to go. My friend and his dad were already in their car driving away from the stadium when they heard the roar of the crowd in the distance behind them. And they turned on the radio to hear that Terry Bradshaw had thrown an impossible pass that ricocheted off of Raiders defenders into the fingertips of Franco Harris, who wasn't even supposed to be downfield on the play, and he scored a game-winning 60-yard touchdown to win the game in the most famous NFL play of all time, called the Immaculate Reception. And my friend heard it from the parking lot on the radio. There's a difference between being in proximity to something and being part of it, between watching from a distance and being part of the action. There's also a difference between being in proximity to a move of God and being right in the center of it. I said earlier that the church is an embodied movement. It's not meant to be spectated. It's not meant to be watched from a distance. It's meant to be lived out in community with others. And I'm not trying to discourage those of you watching on a screen today. I promise I'm going to provide what I think is a solid next step for you before I'm done. But there's no denying that there is a unique joy that comes in our togetherness. I got a Nordic Track treadmill for Christmas this year. You know, the one with a big old screen, and it's crazy that I can go hiking or running anywhere in the world. And so I toured the Hagia Sophia in Turkey, and I hiked the Scottish Highlands in honor of Pastor Stephen. Like, he can pull off the kilt, by the way. I cannot. But one of the crazy features is that you can use this map function to do a 3D hike of anywhere in the world that Google Maps reaches. And so I can walk around Presque Isle, for example, from my basement. So I plugged in our favorite little town in Germany called Braunfels a couple of months ago, and it was so cool. You know, I could see all the places that we'd been. But it paled in comparison to being there with our friend Harold and walking through the castle with someone who had grown up there and who could explain every detail, tasting the fresh-made rolls from the local bakery with the little heart on top. Like, I could not do that from my treadmill, nor should I. But it was fun to take it in from a distance as a digital tourist. But it was nowhere near the same as the shared firsthand experience of a native resident. And some of you have become like digital tourists to the church. You're trying to experience it from a distance, but it's in its original, most primal expression, the church was meant to be engaged in with an overwhelming joy in the presence of Christ and other people with whom we can share meals and worship and go to work and work out the gospel and bear each other burdens and see reconciliation. That's where the joy is, in the shared experience. And so there's a third benefit to our togetherness. Togetherness brings focus to our worship. Notice again in Acts 2:47 that one of the things that happened in their gathering is that they were praising God. And as we've said before, there are many ways that we do this, but one of the ways is through music. Christians are a singing people. We always have been. And I just need to say that I'm so proud of our musicians and our tech and video teams. They pivoted brilliantly when COVID started. And they just began to bring the songs of the faith into our living rooms, right where we needed them, in creative and beautiful ways. They recorded several albums so that when songs we sing when we're together could be portable on every digital platform. And so kudos to our amazing teams, just incredible. And I also know that worship isn't the same by yourself in your home or office or in your living room. It's easy to get distracted by other things as the music plays on the screen. Many people aren't comfortable singing out loud even when they're by themselves or when there's just one other person in the room. Like, the music on the screen is still incredible and inspiring, but it's easy to lose focus without the gathered church around us. You know why? Well, think about it. We've all been on a bunch of Zoom calls this year. We all know how easy it is to be distracted. Think about it. Our concentration comes down to what's filling our field of vision, like the room that you're in. The screen that you're looking at is only part of the whole space. And so even if you're watching on a big screen TV, it's only a small part of what's filling your field of vision in the room. And so there are 100 other things to turn your attention to. But when we're all together, it's harder to become distracted. It still happens, but it's harder. Togetherness helps us to focus. And there is a transcendent focus that happens when I'm in the room where my brothers and sisters are singing the gospel into my ears. Like, my dull heart is awakened by their voices. And there have been times for me since we've been back in person when tears will flow during our corporate singing because I hear my church family singing truths with me, truths that I can forget or be distracted from as my week unfolded. And I confess sometimes I drag into Sundays with a distracted and forgetful heart. Anybody else ever have that? But when brothers and sisters sing truth all around us, like, your heart can wake up again. So we need corporate worship. And I know for me, when I'm singing and I can look around at people who I know are going through stuff, like when I can look across the room at Jake with his big old manly beard, and I know that this dude is going through some stuff. And when we get to the part of Highlands that says, I will praise you on the mountain, I will praise you when the mountain is in my way and you're the summit where my feet are, in the highlands and the heartaches, all the same. And when I see his hands go up in the air in worship and I see him belting out those words, it expands my faith. When I see Adam ravaged physically from cancer and other ailments that he's been battling the last couple of years, and I catch a glimpse of him worshiping out of the corner of my eye, singing Waymaker, Miracle Worker, Promise Keeper, Light in the Darkness, my God, that is who you are. Those are more than just words to him. He's declaring that. He has lived that. Those words are a sacred praise to my friend Adam. Even my wife, Kim, I know the kind of week that she's had. I know every bad thing that's happened to her, every struggle, every sideways relationship, every misfortune. And when she unassumingly opens her hands in front of her and sings, you turn mourning into dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn graves into gardens. And you're the only one who can. It does something for my faith. All of a sudden, the church isn't some institution. It's not some organization. These songs aren't a production. People that I know and love, people that I'm in proximity with, real people are doing business with God. They're declaring truths about God. They're surrendering their hearts to God in big and small ways, and it brings a depth and a focus to my own worship. These kinds of things only happen in our togetherness. And listen, I'm an introvert who takes long drives by myself to crank the volume in my car to 10 and just rip off worship songs all by myself. And there's something to that as well. But to inhabit the same space with other believers, sing the same songs, hear the same message, pray the same prayers, it brings focus to our worship. And like the first church in Acts 2, it's our praising of God. Okay, so we've said togetherness establishes a predictable habit of spiritual priority. It brings the joy of shared experience. It brings focus to our worship. Here's the fourth benefit. Togetherness brings strength in numbers. So part of being together is that we're stronger together. We're safer together. We're more effective together. We can get more accomplished together. We have a strength in numbers. Verse 47 of our text says, and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Do you know that it's been estimated that if a man could get all the muscles in his body to work together, he could lift over 25 tons? That's 50,000 pounds. By comparison, the world record for a single lift using the full capability of only one major muscle is over 1,000 pounds. The strength capacity of all of our muscles working together is exponentially more than a single muscle. The same principle holds true for the church, the body of Christ, by the way. Together, with all of us, a 25-ton dream may be attainable, but alone it's unthinkable. Working together increases our strength. We can do more together. Just the practical things like having enough people to help to spiritually nourish our children, and facilitating events like Serve Erie Saturday, and providing this facility that's not only a gift for us, but a gift for the whole community throughout the year, and to partner with churches all over the world, and to design websites and videos and recordings and other resources that help thousands of people grow in their faith. We can accomplish more together with our collective gifts and skills. We're stronger. And many of you probably don't know, but in addition to the ways that we helped people with coats, for example, this winter, you know, we provided almost 1,000 brand new winter coats this year to families without them through Climate Changers, and almost 100,000 diapers to struggling families with children through the Diaper Depot. Well, at that same time, out of our Transform giving, Aaron and his team went around to tons of local restaurants and their employees who were shut down, cooks and servers, really some of those hardest hit by the pandemic. And we helped them to provide Christmas for their families. We gave away nearly $20,000 to these folks who were shut down, and they were blown away. The notes that we got back said things like, I had no idea that a church would ever think of someone like me. We can do things like that because we're stronger together. None of us alone could pull something like that off, something with such a broad impact around this city. And having favor with all the people, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. We're better together, guys. We're stronger together. Now, I've been hinting at this whole message to those watching today on the screen. I don't want you to feel left out or like second-class citizens at all, because it is possible for the church to be accessed digitally, but it takes some work to achieve this kind of togetherness I'm talking about, this kind of belonging. So I have a challenge for you. We know we have a large and growing number of people who are watching our services both locally and nationally on a screen. Here's my challenge to you. Don't watch alone. Maybe Grace has become your church and you're connecting with us on a screen. Because the church is an embodied movement and because we're better together, I would ask you to invite some people to watch with you. I've heard some reports of this happening already in pockets around the country. I got a note a few weeks ago, even from a young lady in a retirement home, letting me know that some of her friends are gathering together to watch on a TV. I've been getting letters from one of our prisons saying that some of the inmates are gathering to participate together. And to the men who have reached out to me, I'm praying for God to expand your calling and your connection to his kingdom. Right now, no matter where you're watching from, I'm challenging you to gather some others together with you, to sing, to pray, to discuss, to apply, to begin to form a community and a church right there where you are. Our text today said that the early church gathered in the temple courts, yes, but they also gathered from house to house. And so if you want to let us know that you're gathering, maybe at your house, please do. Shoot an email to info@whoisgrace.com. We're going to be working toward developing some resources to assist you in what God has called you to. But for now, don't watch alone. And for others of you, let me offer 2 next steps for you to consider. The first is simply this: commit to attend each week of this series. I know it's June and it's summer and everybody's excited to make plans. Will you prioritize your faith? Will you make sure this month that the first 4 hours that go into your calendar are 1 hour each on Sunday mornings in June? Your soul is worth the investment of time. The second thing I would ask you to consider is this: what is one step that you can take toward experiencing the church together with others? Maybe that means gathering some people in your home to watch church together. Maybe it's stepping into a life group or a challenge group that we have upcoming. Maybe it's saying yes to that ministry team that you've been invited into. Maybe you've gotten out of the habit of coming to church in person and it's time to step back into that. We'll be exploring this theme all month. But what's one step that you can take out of isolation and into togetherness? Do you know why you should? Because we're better together. I love you guys.